This video is sponsored by Doogie, more on them later. Boss fights can make or break a video game. Not every game needs to have them, and there's plenty of games out there that have done just fine without a boss fight in sight, but as soon as a game decides to go down this route, it's a real dice roll whether or not this works out for it. For all the amazing and absolutely terrible fights I've seen over the years, some of the most memorable bosses have come from what I can only describe as false starts. Hard to describe them sometimes, but it's the boss fights that start off looking kinda normal, but quickly devolve to resemble more of a joke or a fake representation of how boss fights should work. I don't know, it's a slightly complicated topic, but you'll figure it out as we go. Which, to be fair, I've been doing this week too, whenever I've had a chance to write this video, which hasn't been all that often recently. But thankfully, this video is sponsored by Doogie and their fancy tablets. I'm on the go a lot these days, and so I've been in the market for something smaller than a laptop that I can carry around and whip out whenever I have the time. Doogie ticks all the boxes for me, and they were kind enough to send me their T10e and T20 mini tablets that both come with blue light certified screens for a crystal clear display, an ultra thin metallic design, and up to 1 terabyte in internal storage. My main use for these has been for writing scripts while I'm away from my desktop, and it's been a lot easier to use than when I was just using my phone. They come in 3 different colours, you can find one that suits your style, and I've even got a pen so I can work on my art. If this all sounds good to you and you fancy picking one up today, Doogie have given me 2 Amazon links with codes that can help you save a load of money. Both links and both codes are also in this video's description. Thank you again to Doogie for sponsoring this video. Anyway, time to just be wonderfully disappointed. Just to reiterate the point at home for anyone who is still looking around like, Rabbid, what the hell is a fake boss fight and why should I care? I would consider a joke boss fight to be any fight that was never fully intended to function like a traditional boss fight. So it's not automatically an easy fight, it's more like a fake out boss that doesn't follow a lot of the same rules as other fights in the game, and is generally there for, you know, a joke. Well damn, if that's the case, then we gotta look towards a series of games full of jokers. And even though Batman Arkham Origins tries to pretend that this game doesn't even have the Joker in it, it doesn't spend too long trying to mislead you. The same cannot be said about the Electrocutioner, who talks a lot of shit and walks around like he owns the place, but in practice, he's the star of quite literally the easiest boss fight in any of the Batman Arkham games. Yeah, even non-Titan Joker puts up more of a fight. That's saying a lot. The Electrocutioner has one real purpose in Arkham Origins, and that is to die later on in the game so that Batman can take his shock gloves as a useful new item. His weapon of choice lasts significantly longer than him and has a larger impact on how Origin functions as a video game, and yet Sparky here doesn't go down without at least the opportunity to fight him. I say opportunity because while the stage is set and Electrocutioner makes his intentions known that he wants to fight Batman in a fairly standard one-on-one fight, Batman has other swifter ideas, and one kick to the head is enough to put Electrocutioner down for the count. Calling it a boss fight might seem disingenuous since it works out more like a cutscene than any kind of boss fight that I've known, but the game is kind or ambitious enough to give him a health bar. Sure, you never end up using it, and the actual fight portion of the encounter is just beating up a bunch of random thugs, but there's just about enough here to classify this as a boss fight. Props to Arkham Origins for having the foresight to set this up and pay it off in the best way possible. Listen, there's no shortage of boss fights in this game. We can afford to underthrow one every now and then. If ever there was a franchise that you'd imagine would be completely immune to the mere concept of a joke boss fight, it would have to be the Soulsborne games, right? I mean, there's some easier encounters and some poorly designed bosses that are easily defeated despite their large size and stature, but these games generally don't have the time to take its foot off of your throat for long enough to throw in a joke boss. However, it's worth remembering that all of these games have some kind of tutorial boss with the sole purpose of showing you how boss fights work in this game and what to expect from the tentpole challenges in your average Soulsborne title. Yes, we're here to learn the controls, but it's like a baby learning to crawl for the first time. If they're heading towards a plug socket with fork in hand, you say, no, don't do it! The obvious exception is Elden Ring, where the openness of the game world means that From Software had to be a little more reasonable with the difficulty, and go so far as to include a tutorial dungeon at the start of the game that loads of people ignored anyway. Oh, to think of what they missed out on. Despite From Software likely wanting players to learn by doing and most likely failing, this optional tutorial dungeon has an optional tutorial boss at the end. The major difference is how this fight is executed, because the days of the Cleric Beast and Gundyr Wrecking House are long gone, and in their place we have Soldier of Godric, one of the strongest opponents you'll ever come across in a Soulsborne. Yeah, no, I'm fucking with you, he's very weak. Kind of shockingly weak too, given all we know about how From Software do tutorial bosses, and there's the concern that fighting such a weak boss just before you let them loose to roam the lands and get roasted by dragons isn't such a good idea. The reality is that Soldier of Godric is little more than a regular enemy with slightly higher stats, so that he takes a few more hits to take down. So there might be the tiniest semblance of a real boss fight going on here if you squint hard enough. But given where we've come from with these kind of fights, Godric can't help but feel like he's only here for a quick and yet surprisingly effective joke. There's stories floating around online of some players struggling with this fight, and while I'm not sure if they're authentic or not, I'm glad you've got a tutorial boss that can do a bit of both. If Soulsborne wants to soften its approach from time to time, you'll have no complaints from me. When I think back to what I'd want from a boss fight in a Star Wars game, I always come back to some kind of one-on-one lightsaber duel. They're often the highlights of the film, so if we're going to the trouble of creating some kind of interactive Star Wars gaming experience, frankly this is the least we should be aiming for. Jedi Survivor pulls this off with some truly memorable and flashy bouts between lightsaber users, but arguably the most memorable fight in the game sees Cal use all of his experience and knowledge of the Force to overcome his greatest foe, Rick the Door Technician. Not to be confused with Rick, Soldier of God, although very likely an homage to the amazing niche fandom that particular Richard built up over time. But Mr. Door Technician himself has all the makings of a classically trained joke boss fight. It's a flex of the writing team for Star Wars Jedi Survivor that Rick is out here taking names in the first place. I don't think this game uproots too many trees of its story, but it has a sense of humour to it that isn't afraid of doing things a tad unconventionally. So when you're running around an Imperial base slicing through any adversaries who are misguided enough to bring a gun to a laser sword fight, it does come as a significant surprise when one of them has a sick nasty health bar that fills up half the top of the screen. Rick the Door Technician has heart and a blood-curdling battle cry. But at the end of the day, my guy is a door technician, not some kind of souped-up combat expert. He puts up a decent fight and wins some major style points, but he goes down to one swift strike from your lightsaber, which, after the gauntlet of regular stormtroopers who you just fought through, is surprisingly relieving. I don't know exactly who amongst the stormtrooper ranks will now be repairing and maintaining the doors, but they have impossibly gigantic shoes to fill. Who else are you gonna get who screams like this? Hey, I know we're all chatty about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and how we've got DLC now, and how fairly disappointing these games were, but if you wind the clock back to a blissfully ignorant time known as 2019, you might be able to remember that Pokemon Sword and Shield were doing all of that before it was cool. Even better and more relevant for this video, I suppose, Sword and Shield had a lot of bosses, and even beyond the story significant fights, we had the max raid battles where you'd fight alongside 3 other trainers, AI or somehow even more brain dead, and try to take down some pretty strong Dynamaxed Pokemon. At their hardest, I don't remember them being too challenging, and certainly not as awkward as some of the Terror raids a generation later, but because at least one person at Game Freak has a sense of humour, the Dynamax raids did bring up one of the funniest scenarios possible with this gimmick. You see, for all the grandstanding, Dynamax as a mechanic doesn't change all that much about Pokemon. You can see this as a reaction to previous generational gimmicks like Z-moves and Mega Evolutions dominating the competitive scene in a way that felt cheap and annoying to play against, but when a Pokemon Dynamaxes, the changes are relatively basic. This giant building-sized Pokemon now comes with a significant boost to its HP, and all of its moves have been replaced by Dynamax versions based on the typing of the move. Apart from that though, and that's basically it. Which is fine, since it kept the competitive players happy for the best part of 3 years, which is no mean feat. But do you know which Pokemon had virtually nothing to gain from Dynamaxing? Yeah, that's right, it's Shedinja, the 1 HP wonder who leans so heavily on an ability that only allows super effective attacks to make it through, which is mostly useless in regular play. So, how does this all play out in a Dynamax raid? Well, Shedinja is made a lot larger and would likely have a fun selection of max moves, but it's a little hard to use them when it still has only 1 HP. Yeah, this game will make a big song and dance about how formidable Dynamax Shedinja is, and it'll even give it a barrier made up of 8 bars, the most of any Pokemon in the game, but it will always go down in 1 super effective hit. You spend significantly longer watching cutscenes in a max raid battle with Dynamax Shedinja than you do actually fighting the thing. Honestly, I don't know if Shedinja was intended to be a joke when it debuted in Ruby and Sapphire, but it's good to know that Game Freak can always repurpose it into a joke if its competitive viability remains fairly non-existent. At least Terra types did something to keep you on your toes. The sky's the limit for my husky boy. You know, it took for me to see a Pokemon game juice up a Shedinja for a punchline for me to fully understand how a fake boss fight can be absolutely hilarious. If you're gonna build up this amazing scenario and then fail to deliver in the most entertaining way possible with like the maximum amount of self-awareness, then it makes sense to lean into this letdown. It needs to be thematically appropriate. There's no point in pulling this trick with, say, Ganondorf or another villain who is meant to be able to back up the intimidation with genuine skill and resilience, but if you ever find yourself face to face with a bad guy who you know is a bit of a poser, then damn, you better believe that a deflated balloon of a boss fight is 100% the best way to go. Spider-Man 2, the video game, not that Spider-Man 2. I mean the Spider-Man 2 which had Mysterio as a villain, and yet, you know, they revealed this as I was writing the video, so not that one. And no, it's not the Spider-Man 2 film that had Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. This is way the fuck back in 2002 when Treyarch, who now exclusively churn out Call of Duties every year, were asked to make a game to tie into the film of the same name and release year. Yeah, Mysterio turns up in that despite not having a second of screen time in the film. Movie tie-ins are funny like that sometimes. Anyway, let's talk about Mysterio, because despite having nothing to do with the film, this game gets Mysterio absolutely perfect. He might be a master of illusions and trickery, but he's also a regular man who just knows the best way to fuck with Spider-Man. So you get some creative levels where the devs get to flex their muscles, but they also know when to rein it in a bit, and not do anything too crazy with Mysterio's skill set. So when you find him robbing this random shop, Mysterio goes through the expected showmanship of bigging himself up and growing not 1 but 3 health bars to really show how much business he means. However, because the developers know their shit, one punch from Spider-Man sends Mysterio sprawling to the floor, with health bars flying everywhere, because obviously, Mysterio in a one-on-one fight with Spider-Man is a hysterical mismatch, and of course he'd crumple like a sheet of paper. You get all the majesty of Mysterio thinking he's hot shit with the glorious come down of reality punching him in the face. I genuinely can't think of a better way to do a joke boss fight that pays homage to Mysterio's character and skill set in the comics, while also just being really funny in isolation. I don't know how the new Spider-Man 2 is going to do Mysterio, but he's dressed in fairly plain clothing, so hopefully they allow him to be kinda pathetic sometimes. You all know you want this scene remade like 2 decades later. And those are the best fake boss fights that I can think of. Do you agree, or is there something else that I'm missing? Let me know in a comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. If you need something else to watch right now, I talked about anti-piracy measures last time, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Sarah Malion, and Scott Riker. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.